So what's going on, guys? As I promised, I would do some research and bring you the story of Tiuba, who was the first lady of West Indian ancestry who was trialed in the Salem witch trials. There are many different stories that are out about Tiuba, stories about her being a Native American, stories about her being a Negro, and stories about her being from the West Indies. So what I did was I've dug into the archives, and the latest newspaper I can find is from 1790. In 1790, there are no stories about the Salem witch trials. There was a story from 1852, but it really didn't talk about the trial itself. It talked about how all of the different people were tried. I wanted to bring you the story about Tiuba's trial. So this story popped up. It's from April 2nd, 1914. Now, I like to go as far back as I can because, guys, over time, stories tend to change. And you'll be given many different versions of a story from many different people. The accuracy of this story from 1914 is even, skeptical because the Salem witch trials happened in 1692. So we all take this with a grain of salt too. But what happened with this slave during the Salem witch trials, and why was she on the chopping block to be burned because of her atrocities? So you gotta bear with me, guys, because these people back in the day, they didn't use the same verbiage as we did. They used different vernacular as we did. So if I stumble on some of these words, excuse me. I'm going to do the best I can to bring this to you. So, famous trials, that's how this article starts off. The people of Massachusetts in the 17th century, like all other Christian people at the time, at least with extremely rare individuals, exceptions, believed in the reality of a hideous crime called witchcraft. In a few instances, witches were believed to have appeared in New England in the early years, but the cases had been sporadic, with 3 or 4 expectations. No person appeared to have been punished for witchcraft in Massachusetts, nor convicted of it, for more than 60 years after the settlement. The first real show of the witchcraft spirit came in 1692, in February, when the daughter of Samuel Parris, the minister of Salem village, and the niece began to have strange compresses. The former was a child of 9 and the latter 12. In the family of the minister were 2 slaves, John and Tiuba, who he had brought from the West Indies. The 2 children startled the neighborhood by their unaccountable performances, creeping under tables, assuming strange and painful attitudes, and uttering inconsistent cries. This went on for some time, when the 12-year-old daughter of the neighbor also began to act strangely. The families became distressed, and the neighborhood alarmed. These children would fall into convulsions and utter piercing shrieks. At other times, they would force their limbs into grotesque postures and become incapable of speech and motion. At length it was declared that nothing short of witchery was the trouble. The physicians were perplexed and baffled, and naturally encouraged by the verdict of physician and minister, countenanced by Mr. Paris and the church members. These affected children, as they and some other girls and women similarly affected in the village were now called begin their accusations. The first persons mentioned were Tiuba, the Indian slave, Goodbye Osborne, a bedridden woman whose mind was affected by many troubles, physical and mental, and Sarah Good, a friendless, forlorn creature who was looked upon as a variant in March 1692. The first examinations were held in the meeting house in Salem Village. John Hawthorne, ancestor of the novelist, and Jonathan Colwyn, actor and magistrate, the three accused having previously been remanded to jail. The victims did not receive fair treatment for their guilt was assumed from the first, and no counsel was allowed at the trial. It was brought out that the children were tortured whenever the accused looked at them. During the months of April and May of 1692, Justices Hawthorne and Cowan, with Marshal George Herrick, were busy getting the witches into jail, and the good people were startled, astounded, and terror-stricken at the number who seized. Bridget Bishop, who had been accused of witchcraft 20 years before, was the first to be brought to trial. She, as there was no doubt about her, she was quickly condemned and was hung on the 10th day of June in the presence of a crowd and sad and frightened people. The new Governor Phelps, who had just arrived, fell in with the prevailing fear and new bench of special judges was sworn in on the 30th of June. Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Hawthorne, Sarah Wilder were brought to trial, all found guilty except Nurse, who, being a church member, was acquitted by the jury. In her first trial, Tiuba the slave confessed that under threats from Satan, who had most often appeared to her as a man in black, accompanied by a yellow bird, she had tortured the girls and named as accomplices the two women, Good and Osborne. Tiuba was sent to the Boston jail, where she remained until the delusion was over. She was then sold to pay the expenses of her imprisonment and is lost to history. Within a few months, several hundred people in Salem and nearby places were thrown into jail. On the 5th of August, a new batch was held before the court. They were all quickly convicted and sentenced and were hanged on the gallows. Hill, if not long before the jails were full, 150 persons awaited trial. 200 more were accused and suspected. Finally, on the second Wednesday in October 1692, about a fortnight after the last hanging of 8 in Salem, the representatives of the colonies assembled, and the people of Hanover, their minister, joining with them, appeared with their remonstrance against the doings of the witch tribunals, and reverse came at last at the following trials, and the juries changed sooner than clergy. At the January session of the court in 1693, only 3 were convicted, and They were reprieved in the spring. Governor Phelps began about to leave the country. Pardon all who were condemned, and the jails were delivered. The excitement subsided as rapidly as it had risen, but the evil work was done. Wow. Man, guys, excuse the terrible read. And again, the way that they worded things and they said things back then and placed things in certain order just is not the way that we speak today. Never mind the fact I'm reading from a newspaper that was printed in 1912 and wasn't printed very good. So it says that Tiuba was lost to history. So there's no telling what happened with her, after that. There are books that have been written about her story. There are videos on YouTube with people who have talked about her, who have brought updated information about her and many different things of that nature. But I told you that I would bring you the information about the trial. I thought she actually got hung and got killed as well, which I find to be very interesting that they did not kill her. They killed damn near almost everybody else, but they didn't kill her. But it goes on to records to know that when I did the research, they did say that if a person did confess, if they did confess to doing something wrong, and then if they did confess to actually practicing witchcraft, which she did confess to practicing witchcraft, and some research that I did, and she did confess that she did speak to the devil, as you heard, and expressed who he was and what he looked like. And this is initially why she didn't get killed, because she admitted it. That's why she didn't get killed, but man, just a crazy, crazy story I wanted to share with you all here on Women's History Month. Crazy. Guys, let me know what you think in the comments. I'll catch up with you in the next one. Peace out.